the temple that should not exist. In the autumn of 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt was doing something that archaeologists do not usually do. He was digging a hole in a hilltop in southeastern Turkey, not because he expected to find anything. Local farmers had been turning up large stone blocks for years, and the blocks were strange, carved, deliberate, and clearly artificial. No one could explain them, but Schmidt had learned to pay attention when farmers told him things were strange. What he found at that hill, northeast of the modern city of Anlierfa, was Göbekli Tepe. It broke every model we had for how human civilization developed. It broke them so thoroughly that more than 30 years later, archaeologists are still arguing about what it means. The site consists of a series of circular enclosures carved into the bedrock of a limestone hill. The enclosures are defined by massive T-shaped pillars, standing 3 to 6 meters tall and weighing up to 20 tons. The pillars are carved with reliefs depicting animals, foxes, serpents, boars, aurochs, gazelles, cranes, and scorpions. They were rendered with a technical skill and aesthetic sophistication that was not supposed to exist at this time. The dating was unambiguous, based on burnt animal bones and organic materials tested by multiple laboratories. Göbekli Tepe was constructed approximately 9,600 years ago. This is at least 7,000 years before Stonehenge and 6,000 years before the first pyramids of Egypt. It is contemporary with, and in fact predates, the earliest known agricultural settlements. And here is the thing that has kept archaeologists awake at night ever since. It appears to have been built by hunter-gatherers. The problem with Göbekli Tepe. Let me explain why this is such a problem. The standard model of human social evolution dates back to the 19th century, formalized by scholars like V. Gordon Childe. It holds that societies develop in a predictable sequence. First, there is the hunting and gathering stage, characterized by small, mobile bands. No permanent settlements, no social stratification, and no monumental architecture. Second, there is the agricultural revolution, which creates food surplus and permanent settlement. It creates population density, which generates social stratification. Eventually, it produces the state, the city, the temple, and the monument. This is the sequence. Subsistence strategy determines social organization. Cultural complexity determines the capacity for large-scale collective projects. This model has been refined, challenged, and modified over the past century and a half, but its basic logic remains intact in most introductory archaeology textbooks. Monumental architecture is a product of civilization, and civilization is a product of agriculture. Göbekli Tepe breaks this model entirely. The site was not built by farmers. Botanical evidence analyzed in detail shows its builders were still primarily exploiting wild cereals. They had not yet domesticated wheat or barley. The faunal evidence shows they were hunting wild animals, rather than raising domestic livestock. Agriculture was not the basis of their subsistence, and yet, they built something that is, by any definition, monumental. 20 or more circular enclosures and hundreds of tons of carved limestone, an organizational effort that would be impressive even by modern standards. It required coordination, planning, and labor on a scale no small band could easily sustain. Archaeologist Klaus Schmidt argued that Göbekli Tepe was not a settlement. It was a ritual site where hunter-gatherer groups gathered periodically for ceremonies. They required communal labor on a massive scale. He believed this was a pilgrimage site where bands came together in peace. United by shared ritual, the act of building it together was part of the ritual. This interpretation suggests something extraordinary. The impulse to build monumental architecture predated the agricultural revolution. It did not emerge as a consequence of settled civilization. It was present in our species before we ever planted a single seed. The cult of the pillar. The pillars at Göbekli Tepe are arranged in circular patterns. Two large pillars stand in the center of each enclosure, facing each other. A ring of smaller pillars forms the outer boundary. The pillars are carved with relief sculptures that are among the oldest known. They are more than 6,000 years older than the carvings of Fundik Talg, more than 7,000 years older than the carvings of Egypt, older than any carved stone monuments that had previously been known. The animal reliefs are remarkably detailed. A fox is wrapped around one pillar, its sinuous body following the curve. Its ears are pricked, its eye looking out at the viewer. A serpent winds through a series of interlocking circles. That motif will appear again and again in human art. From the carved serpent mounds of North America to the Ouroboros of Egypt, a boar faces a vulture, and an aurochs confronts a gazelle. A crane stands with its wings spread in a threat display or mating ritual. The technical skill is extraordinary, especially given the tools were stone, primarily obsidian, which is volcanic glass, but still just stone. Here is what is perhaps most interesting about the carvings. They are not decorative. They are not background ornamentation. They are the primary focus of the pillar. The message it conveys. The T-shape represents a human figure, a torso and arms without legs. In other words, the pillars are not just stones, they are statues. They are representations of gods, ancestors, spirits, or something else entirely, something that the builders considered worth memorializing in stone. Who were these figures, and what did they represent? We have no idea, and this too is significant. Göbekli Tepe demonstrates that the capacity for symbolic representation is real. Creating images that carry meaning beyond their material form is not new. It is not a product of civilization. It is at least 9,600 years old. The boy who carved the fox. I want to pause here and imagine what it was like to build it. The pillars were not carved in place. They were carved in a quarry on the hilltop and then moved, somehow, to their final positions in the circular enclosures. The quarry is still visible, and the partially carved pillars left in it give us a sense of the process. A pillar would have been roughly shaped in the quarry, then maneuvered out of the quarry pit. How exactly remains one of the mysteries of the site. Some archaeologists believe they were slid on wooden rollers. Others suggest they were levered along on stone sledges. Others propose more exotic methods. Either way, this was a logistical challenge of enormous scale for a pre-agricultural society, and it was not done by professionals. It was done by communities, groups of hunter-gatherers who came together to invest months of labor in building something that had no obvious material benefit to them. There were no homes at Göbekli Tepe, no evidence of permanent habitation, no storage facilities, no workshops, no kilns. People came, they built, they left. The site was never a settlement. It was always a destination. This means that Göbekli Tepe represents something remarkable: voluntary collective labor on a massive scale, organized by a society with no centralized authority, no state, no army, no coercive apparatus. How? The answer, archaeologists believe, is ritual. Ritual provides a mechanism for mobilizing collective labor that does not require coercive authority. People will work together to build a temple because they believe the temple is sacred, because the ritual activity of building creates social bonds, because the ceremony that the temple enables is valuable to them in ways that transcend material benefit. This is a pattern that we see repeatedly in human history. Medieval cathedrals were built by communities of believers who contributed money, labor, and skills for generations, not because they were paid to do so, but because they believed. The same is true of temples across cultures and eras. Göbekli Tepe suggests that this impulse, the impulse to build temples, to create sacred space, to invest collective effort in the non-material, is not a product of civilization. It is a precondition for it. The destruction of the sacred. Here is one of the most puzzling and least discussed facts about Göbekli Tepe. It was deliberately buried. After being in use for approximately 1,000 years, a span during which the site was modified, expanded, and maintained by successive generations, the builders filled in the enclosures with rubble, debris, and soil, effectively burying them. New enclosures were built on top of the filled-in ones, and these too were eventually filled in and buried. The process was repeated multiple times. The site was abandoned, and it sat under an artificial hill, a mound of earth and stone deliberately placed over the sacred structures, for 9,000 years. In 1994, Klaus Schmidt put a bulldozer into that mound and began to dig. He did not know what he would find, and no one could have known. Why would a community deliberately bury their most sacred site? The honest answer is that we do not know, but there are theories. One suggests that the burial represents a shift in religious belief. Old sacred spaces were no longer relevant, needing to be sealed and replaced. Another suggests the burial was a practical act for structural safety. A third suggests it was a ritual act, a ceremony of closure, a final act of respect, Or perhaps just a long goodbye. What would the world look like if Göbekli Tepe had never been built? This is not a trivial question, and it is worth asking. It represents the earliest evidence for collective construction of sacred spaces. If not for this, the model of social evolution would remain intact. We would not know that hunter-gatherers could build such temples. But it exists, and its existence demands that we revise our models. The temple did not come after the city. It may have come first. The sacred impulse may have driven the agricultural revolution. People gathered for rituals and gradually settled around those sites. The temple may have created the city, not the city the temple. This interpretation is speculative, and it is not yet proven, but it is consistent with the evidence we have managed to uncover. It is a reminder that history is not a simple linear story. It is stranger, messier, and more wonderful than we once thought. Less than 5% of the site has been explored so far. There are more enclosures, pillars, and carvings beneath the hill. What else is down there? And what else did these people know? We are going to spend the next century finding that out. Every new discovery will make it stranger than we currently imagine. The pillar that was never finished remains waiting for us. There is one pillar at Göbekli Tepe that was never finished. It lies in the quarry, half emerged from the bedrock. Abandoned mid-carving, its T-shape is only roughed out. The arms, the hands, the human form are barely visible. It was left in the rock and has remained for 9,600 years. We do not know why the carvers stopped their work. Perhaps they died, or moved on, or just walked away. Something happened. A catastrophe or a shift in belief. There is something poignant about this unfinished pillar. It is a reminder that people built this, not some civilization. People who started things and did not finish them. People who did not know their work would outlast everything else. The pillar is the most human thing at Göbekli Tepe. It is evidence they were people like us who planned and failed. 95% of the site is still underground. What is down there? Waiting in the dark. The unfinished pillar is not the end of the story. It is the beginning. The site was used intensively for 1,000 years. It was maintained, modified, and expanded over time. Then, it was deliberately buried with rubble and soil. The sacred structures were sealed beneath a mound. This sequence, build, use, bury, is itself a ritual. Göbekli Tepe was a living ritual with a beginning and an end. The people who buried it were saying this is finished. This belongs to the past now. They walked away, back into the world of hunter-gatherers. Göbekli Tepe sat in the dark for 9,000 years. Waiting, what a wait it has been.